Привет всем. How is everybody doing? Thank you very much for attending my talk on multiplayer games with WebXR. Today, I'm going to tell you a story, and this story is a compilation of many different experiences. Some of them include my first experience with virtual reality, the challenges that I faced, why I felt that WebVR was the right choice to make, my love story with A-Frame, and various other experiences and thoughts, as a result of which I created a series of demos. So this story will take you through a journey where you will learn to leverage different moving components and possibilities to create your own multiplayer WebXR game. So this story has an element of nostalgia, as we'll be using the Pokemon universe for our demos. OK, let's get started. Yes, that's me, despite of the little resemblance. My name is Tanay Pant, and I currently work as an operations analyst at ResearchGate in Berlin. I'm also a part of two really amazing programs within Mozilla, the Tech Speakers program and the Reps program. Those of you who'd like to know more about this, feel free to catch me after the talk. I'm also an Intel software innovator in the field of IoT and have published books on Firefox OS, Raspberry Pi, and web-based virtual reality. And of course, I love Pokemons, but we'll talk about that later. That's my Twitter handle, and I'll be posting the link to my GitHub repository where I have hosted all the demos showcased in that talk, so feel free to watch that space. So last night I was debating if I should do this or not, but I'm sure you learned a lot. It's the second last talk of the conference. It's the evening, and of course, yesterday was BHS, so I'm pretty sure you're all tired. Let's jazz up the energy in this room by doing something which I call the open web stretch. So please bear with me for a few minutes. I would request you to stand up on your seats. All right, thank you. So this is how it goes. First of all, we reach up to all the open source streams. Reach high up there. Now we go down to the grassroots. We come back up and blow the winds of change. Then we put our hands forward and shake the money tree for fundraising. Really important. Give it a good shake. Then we lean left to avoid the NSA. We lean right to avoid the FSB. Then we go all around to avoid the NSA and FSB. Awesome. Thank you so much. Please have a seat. Thank you very much. How many of you have had any experience with virtual reality? OK, my first experience with virtual reality was when my father got me a Google Cardboard. And it was quite interesting for me because he just used his mobile, opened the app, and put the phone in the Google Cardboard. I remember not having a particularly great day, probably because of my exams. Anyways, it transported me to a different place. I was certainly in a roller coaster, and it was spectacular. It was love at first sight. And as time passed by, I did learn that virtual reality is not just about gaming and entertainment, but it's also useful for many other different things. So if you're an engineering student, it's quite useful to visualize 3D models in a 3D space. If you're an artist, Google Tilt Brush and A-Painter give you the possibility of painting in a 3D space. And not so long ago, Samsung created a demo where it helps people who have acrophobia, which is the fear of heights, to overcome their fear in a safe environment. And that resonated really well with me because I have a fear of unguarded heights. And if you ask me to overcome my fear by standing at the edge of a building, I would be pissed off. So this shows how VR can be used for the enhancement of mankind as well. So time passes by, and now I'm in college. I have all the free time in the world, and I decide I'm going to make a VR application. By that time, there were already quite some devices, VR devices, and each of them had a different SDK. And the size of each SDK was in gigabytes. Gigabytes? Seriously? I had 1 gigabyte limit per day in my college broadband. And it was not a great college when it came to the bandwidth. And Even if I did manage to somehow make the app, I was pretty skeptical that one of my batchmates are actually going to download or install the app. And these SDKs did have a steep learning curve. And you would need to submit your applications to the App Store, and which they basically act as a gatekeeper before you can finally publish your app. There were just too many points of friction, and to be honest, it was quite demotivating, especially for a freshman college student. Then one day I heard about WebVR. What is this? Can a browser even display graphics at a good enough rate to match performance of a native application? I was skeptical. But then it did make quite a compelling case. It was open. Anybody could publish anything because it's the web, of course. Different VR scenes can be interconnected with each other via hyperlinks and portals. And one could have instant VR experiences. You create your HTML files, you serve them over the internet, send a link to your friend. And it's as easy as sending it over Telegram or Facebook Messenger, and they just have to click on it. No build steps, no installations required. This indeed seemed something I would like to try. Moreover, I already knew HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. I was really psyched. I was going to make my first VR application. And then I learned it's not that easy. There's just too many moving components to handle. So how many of you have actually used WebGL or 3JS, or both, maybe? OK, not a lot. So these are two really crucial components of creating a WebVR application. And if you have used those, you would know that they have a pretty steep learning curve themselves. You need to install VR effects, preload assets, initialize the screen, set up lighting and camera, take care of the responsiveness, and canvas. I didn't want to go through all this trouble just to create a small prototype. There's a lot of boilerplate, and with each new version of libraries, you would need to update your code. And if you haven't dealt with this before, how likely are you to create a Hello World program in WebVR? OK, as expected. So at this time, me, myself, I was very close to abandoning my dream of creating a VR application. My exams got started in the university, and after a month, I found something called A-Frame on Twitter. Apparently, Mozilla had started this new team called MozVR, and they were developing this framework. I thought, OK, let's give this one last shot. So A-Frame is a declarative framework for building virtual reality experiences on the web. Fair enough. As I started to go through examples and documentation, I was quite impressed. It was designed in such a way that it made easy for web developers to work with no previous graphic knowledge. And it definitely made prototyping and experimenting with WebVR much faster. It was the perfect vehicle to kick off the web ecosystem. So this is a WebVR Hello World program written using A-Frame. As you can see, it's just HTML. You can start by dropping a script tag, which includes the minified version of A-Frame.js library. And one single line of code, this A-Scene attribute, basically handles everything, like canvas, camera, renderer, lights, controls, WebVR polyfill, VR effect. And to further continue development in this, we put our stuff inside A-Scene. You can see here that I have included some primitives which come with A-Frame, like box, sphere, cylinder, plane, and sky. They have many attributes of their own as well, like position and rotation, which are specified in the XYZ axis. So A-Frame is an entity component system. Have any of you used Unity 3D? Okay, 3 people. So Unity 3D is a game development platform. And entity component system is quite popular in game development and is used by softwares like Unity 3D. So basically, all the objects in the scene are entities which are inherently empty objects. You can plug in components to these to attach appearance, behavior, or functionality. Hence, the entity component system provides an easy way to build up different kinds of objects. These are some of the components that ship with A-Frame, and if you remember our first example, you don't have to worry if you want to build something like, let's say, Minsk gates, and you don't have to build it with cylinders and boxes. So there are some different components that are present with A-frame, such as collada model and object model, which allow you to import 3D models in the form of .dae and .obj objects. And since A-frame is fully extensible at its core, the community has filled the ecosystem with tons of components. Components can do whatever they want. They have superpowers. Basically, they have access to 3JS and web APIs. And this component ecosystem is the lifeblood of A-frame. You can simply drop these components as script tags and use them straight from HTML. So this is an example of advanced developers empowering other developers and working on collecting these components. These components are collected and are made available in the A-frame registry. It's like a store of components the team makes sure work well, and people can browse and search for components or install them. I have included the link of a registry in the GitHub repo. OK, enough talk. So before we move forward, I would like to request you to kindly close your eyes for 5 seconds and recall your earliest moments of your interaction with Pokemon. Maybe it was your own childhood, maybe you watched it with your own children, or if you're like me, you probably got hit by a door playing Pokemon Go. All right, let's have a look at some code. Is it visible in the back? Perfect. So we have a standard HTML file here, and we have included the minified version of the A-frame library. Then we go ahead and initialize the scene with ascene. And I have added a component called fog, which basically obscures objects in fog at a certain distance from the camera to make it more realistic. And then I have used something called the asset management system of A-frame, which helps in preloading and caching to improve the performance of the application. So here I have included tons of models that I found all over the web. So these are .dae models, and I have included them as asset items. I have also included images, different kinds of images that I have used as texture in the scene. And then we start to add all these entities and position them. So first of all, I have added a Pokeball, and I have also added an animation so that it rotates about its central axis. And we start by putting all the different Pokemons all over the scene. And if you see things like 3.1737, don't worry about it. I'll tell you how to do that later on. This is not manual. And finally, we add the scene. We add the plane where all these objects are situated and add a color to the sky. Let's take a look at what that gets us. OK, so everything works as expected. We have a Pokeball, which is rotating in the middle of the field. We have different Pokemon situated here. So if you open this in a mobile, on the right-hand side, bottom right-hand side, you will notice that there's a goggles sign. So if you are using a VR headset and placing your mobile in it, when you tap on this, this basically splits it into 2 fields of vision. And if you're using a laptop, you can use the WASD keypad for moving around and the mouse for changing your field of vision. So we can move around and have a look at various models that have been included here. And if you have a look at the floor and the walls that are surrounding us, these are basically boxes which have been resized, and I have added a texture to them. So here we have the merry group of various different Pokemons. Now, if you remember, the values of different positions were quite weird. So in order to not have an issue with that, what A-frame did was introduce something called A-frame inspector. So you can invoke this by pressing Control, Option, and I. And this loads up the A-frame inspector. If you see on the right-hand side, it lists all the entities that have been used in the demo. And you can select any entity that you want here. You can change its positioning. You can change its rotation like this. And you can even scale it and add different kinds of behavior directly from here. So even if you are not very familiar with HTML, you can still use A-frame inspector to create a VR scene. And as I change the different values, you can see on the right-hand side panel, the values are changing as well. So once you have made the appropriate changes to the A-frame scene, you can download it as a HTML file here. So this basically saves all the changes that you have made. And you can also go closer to the different objects and inspect them from here. All right, moving on. Since A-frame is based on HTML, it is compatible with all the existing libraries and framework like Vue.js, React.js, D3.js, and so on. And playing in a virtual world is much more fun with friends. And here's a demo which shows A-frame using a component called networked A-frame, which you can find on the A registry. So what I've done here in this demo is I have simulated a conference room and opened 2 sessions at once, one using my laptop and one using my mobile. So as you can see, many different people had opened the application at this time, hence the different audience. And if I look back at the player which I've opened with my mobile, as soon as I start tapping on the mobile phone, it starts giving me feedback by waving. And if I tilt my mobile, it shifts its face down. If I tilt it upwards, it shifts its face up, and tapping gives us waving feedback. So this library also has various other kinds of adapters for WebSockets, DeepStream Hub, and other real-time databases to sync across various sessions that have been opened, the data such as position, rotation, and so on. So I was quite happy that I made that application at that time. I had a working VR application which had Pokemons in it, and that's all I cared about at that time. But then I thought to take a step back and think what the term virtual reality actually means. We are trying to simulate something that, in a way that it looks more and more real. So, okay, we can probably use some really high-quality graphics, high-quality models to make the things look almost real. So when I was thinking about this, I came across something called Pokemon Go. How many of you have played it? Pokemon Go? Nobody? Okay, so it's an application which basically has it has geotagged Pokemons all over the world, and you take your mobile, and with the AR technology, you see those Pokemons as if they are standing in front of you, and you have to flip Pokeballs at them. So if it touches that, you kind of get some kind of score. So when I saw this, I realized that this was much better than WebVR or what I was doing. It basically took the real world and added a layer of information on the top of it. So AR, that seems like the real deal. Then I did some more research and came across AR.js. So adding a layer of information to the real world seems to make things even better. And AR.js had a seamless integration with A-frame. So this is how it works. So I include AR.js, and AR.js comes with a couple of preset markers. So if you see that one here, it's a preset marker called Hero, and it comes with 2 or 3 of them. And when you take your mobile, it uses the web APIs to use the camera. And if you point your camera at that marker, that basically presents whatever 3D information or whatever information that you want to convey. So let's take a look at what we have here. We have included the A-frame library, and we have also now included the AR.js library. We then define what kind of marker we would be using. So here we have used the preset Hero, and we finally include the virtual content that we want to show when this marker is recognized. And here it's a box. So that looked quite appealing to me, and I wanted to try and see how it works out. I wrote my own version of this, but of course put Pokemons in it. So here as well we have the A-frame and the AR.js library, and I'm using the asset management system, same Hero preset marker, and within it I have included a Pokemon ball which rotates and 4 Pokemons which are surrounding the Pokeball. Let's take a look at what it looks like. So it asked me for permission to use the webcam, and that's me. So I'm going to use the Hero preset marker that we were earlier using, and when I do this, I get the rotating Pokeball and Pikachu, Squirtle, Bulbasaur. What's the name of the 4th one? Anybody? Okay, I can't remember that. So we have 4 different kind of Pokemons, and it basically took a layer of 3D information using A-frame and added it to the real world. Also, what you can do is include Gltf models. Have anybody heard of Gltf models? Okay, so Gltf models are basically a format for 3D models. It's relatively new, and what it does, it minimizes the size of 3D assets and also their runtime. And Gltf has 3 different kinds of files. It has a .gltf file, which is basically a JSON file. It has a binary, and it has textures in it. And it works very seamlessly with A-frame, and actually it works even better than the DAE models. And these can be animated. So if you have a look at the code here, I have included a new library, new component called A-frame extras. This basically takes all the animation information that is present, and it adds it to the model. And here I have included the Gltf model and added the component animation mixer. Let's take a look at what that gets us. So here we have a drone which is animated, and okay, lighting, perfect. So basically, Gltf is also known as the JPEG of 3D, and it can be used for using animated models, which of course, if you're using AR, it makes things much more interesting. Moving on, just using the preset markers like hero was not that scalable or personalized. I wanted to create a game with my own markers, and I needed quite a lot of them. And the great thing is that the creator of this library also has provided us with a tool where we can upload our own images, and it generates an image file, which is basically a marker, and a pattern file. And if you go ahead and want to try this out to create your own markers, just 2 caveats that you should be careful of, because that annoyed me a lot when I was starting off with it. So the image that you're going to include in the center of this marker should be off-white. And also, if you're going to look at the tutorials that are present on the web, it does not work with them, because you have to take care of using the newest version of the library, because there were some bugs which got fixed on later on. Well, this kind of suited what I wanted to achieve, and I ended up creating my own marker. So if we take a look at the code again, we see the same libraries that have been included. In the asset management system, I included an image. And instead of using a marker here, I have used a marker camera. And instead of using preset as hero, I'm going to use a custom marker. It's a type of pattern, and I have included the URL to the pattern file. And this pattern file I got when I generated it from the tool that I mentioned before. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here we have this again, and if I present the hero marker, it no longer recognizes it. So I created a marker with my own name, and as it recognizes it, it shows a contact card with my own name and Twitter ID. So what you can do is you can create markers of various different types for different functionalities within the game. I have also included the link of this tool in the GitHub repository, which I'll be posting also in the conference group. Okay, well, performance is a crucial part of any web app. And A-frame allows you to monitor the stats of your application by adding the attribute stats to the ascene tag. It can measure various metrics, as you can see, like frame per second. So for frame per second, you should aim at a stable 90 frames per second with the WebVR 1.0 API. Then you can measure the textures, programs, geometries, vertices, faces, load time, how many entities are there, all this with the tool. So as you can see, the performance of this demo is not so great because I loaded a bunch of entities into it. how many of you have heard of Google Tilt Brush? I mentioned it a bit earlier on, but how many of you have used it, heard of it? Okay, just one, two, three. Okay, so Google Tilt Brush, what is it? So do you know of HTC Vive? Okay, so HTC Vive is a VR headset, and it comes with sensors. So what you can do is Google Tilt Brush gives you a room scale experience where you can paint in 3D, somewhat like this. Why am I showing this slide? I'm showing this slide to show you how powerful A-Frame can be. And just for that purpose, to demonstrate that, the Moz VR team constructed a 90+ FPS room scale tilt brush experience in just a few weeks using just A-Frame. In a nutshell, VR is fun, and A-Frame makes developing WebVR content fun. So this concludes my talk. We discussed the various components that can be used to make WebVR games, multiplayer games with WebXR, such as models in A-Frame, animating them, adding multiplayer capabilities, and leveraging AR capabilities. You can also utilize the many different libraries that a registry has to, for example, add physics to your scene. This will allow you to have a game in which there are different markers hidden in a venue, for example, and whenever you scan them, you get an animated Pokemon which is running over. And using the physics library, you have to hit them with a Pokeball, and of course, when you hit them, you get a score, and this score will be synced across the various devices or players. I can't wait to see what all of you are going to make out of it. Большое спасибо. Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk. You are welcome for the interview.
Okay, it was really interesting and the demos was awesome, but I have one question that bothers me the most.
Go ahead.
What about of myriad of input devices? So output device is single, like your phone screen or your computer screen. But the input devices for AR, VR, just really different. Like HTC have their own, like Google Cardboard have one algorithm, one way of interacting with VR. Daydream have other algorithm, and the Chinese devices have like Bluetooth mouse simulator. So what do you think about that? Will there be like some standards in the future, or we should abandon all hope?
Right, so there are already some devices, yes, like if you're going to use Google Cardboard, the issue comes with input, then you can only have 3D experience where you cannot move, so that kind of acts as a limitation. But with new devices coming in, like I tried out Oculus Go last weekend, and it comes with a controller. And these devices, as time passes on, the technology is maturing, these devices get cheaper. And of course, it's much more freedom if you're using an Android device, because there are quite some attachments. For example, with Bluetooth, you can use very cheap controllers and can connect to them with web APIs.
So what was for you the most awful device to work with? Like you really hate right now?
I don't hate any specific device, but okay, the one which I disliked was I had some version of Samsung quite some time ago, and it did not have a gyroscope. So basically, if I turn it up and down, it does not affect the VR scene. So that was really frustrating. But I guess that phone was not really great.
Yeah. Well, thank you a lot. Thank you.